Hey, welcome once again to Lehto's Law. I'm Steve Lehto, attorney at law in the state of Michigan. I've been practicing law for 26 years in the fields of consumer protection and lemon law. And I often write about this stuff, and I actually had a commenter on a recent video complain, and he said, Steve, you said you write about this stuff and you've written some books. And he said, that's vague or ambiguous. And I said, well, no, if you think about it, if I say I write about stuff and I've written books, the implication is the stuff is non-book writing. And he said that was unclear. So I think I need to tell you this. To make it clear, I've written 12 books. I've written the forwards to 3 other books. I've written several hundred articles online. I've written probably about 100 articles that appeared in magazines and newspapers. And I practice lemon law. So that's the point that I was trying to get across there. But today we're going to talk about credit reports. And you may notice if you're watching on the video that there's someone sitting next to me. Now, if you're listening on the podcast on iTunes or elsewhere, you couldn't know that unless you were listening really carefully to catch the fact that someone's sitting next to me. But sitting next to me is my good friend, Ian Lyngklip. Ian, how are you?
I'm doing great. How you doing, Steve?
Doing very well. So this is an experiment in a lot of ways, but if people are seeing this, that means the experiment was successful. And we're actually at your office, and I brought my equipment down, and we're doing a podcast, a video, and I have a guest for the first time ever on Lehto's Law. I think this is episode 4.49. So I'm about to break into my 5th season of podcasting.
Wow.
But yeah. And I'll tell you, I tried doing a podcast previously with a guest, and it didn't work. Mainly because
was that me? Was that guest me?
No, it wasn't you. It was actually I set all the equipment up at a guy's place. We went through the whole entire process. I shut everything off, and I went to pop the card out of the recorder, and there's no card in there. Which is the equivalent.
Did we check the card this time?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Which is a lot like shooting a couple rolls of film before you realize you've got no film in your camera.
Got it.
For people who understand what cameras and film are, because that's showing how old we are. But you, Mr. Lyngklip, are an attorney also, practicing for how long?
About 25 years, but it feels like 26.
Yeah, and I believe I met you very, very early in my career, and because you do a lot of consumer protection stuff. But somewhere along the line, our paths diverged. And I specialize I do almost nothing but lemon law. Whereas you do a lot of stuff involving credit and credit reporting, credit scores, debt collection, things like that. But I wanted to talk to you today about credit reports. And you know, everyone knows what a car is. They have a car. I talk about cars all the time. But credit reports are something, everyone's got a credit report too, right?
No, everybody has hundreds of credit reports.
Okay. And what is a credit report that you're talking about?
Okay. So we've all heard about credit reports, but the reason I say that there's hundreds of them is there are literally actually thousands of agencies that are set up as credit reporting agencies, and they all have different data about you. So the hallmark of a credit report is it's a collection of data that has been gathered for the purpose of evaluating a consumer to receive either credit, insurance, or employment.
And the scary part about this is that I didn't go out and give anyone permission to do this. I didn't say, I want you to make a credit report about me. Whether you like it or not, there are credit reports about you as long as you're on the grid, correct?
Absolutely. Even if you're not on the grid, if you don't think you're on the grid, there is still data about you someplace. Unless you have been, operating on cash or gold since 1972, 1979, they got a report for that too. But since 1972, when we went out the gold standard, if you've been doing that, then maybe there's not a credit report about you. But short of that, there is a credit report, because every time that you sign into a buyer's club, a rewards club, anytime that you return merchandise, anytime you report a fraud, there are any number of triggers for these, and those triggers reflect really the different content and the different specialties of each of these credit reports.
And there's basically 3 credit reporting agencies we've heard of, right? The 3 big ones, right?
The big 3, and actually sometimes people think about the big 4. There's a 4th agency now that has been trying for several years to break into that same market, along with Experian, Equifax, and TransUnion, and that other agency is Innovis.
Okay, so these credit reporting agencies basically scrub this information from every source they can get it. Like, for instance, if you have a credit card, if you make your payments on time or don't make them on time, they report that to the credit reporting agency. A lot of companies that get recurring bills, if you don't pay them on time, they'll report you. Where else do they get the information from?
Well, the major sources of data are what you said, but think about them this way. They are banks, finance companies, and debt collectors are the primary sources of what's referred to as trade line information. So information about accounts and collection accounts that you have. And there's about 40,000 subscribers that were out there the last time that I talked to one of these bureaus. About 40,000 different contributors to these to the big four databases.
Okay, and I'll tell you right now, I never even looked at my own credit report until I was an attorney. And it's because I never really thought that much about it. But they also weren't that much in the news until more recently. And so a couple of things.
We haven't looked at your credit report yet, Steve?
I don't know. I've looked at it recently, but my credit score is actually doing pretty good these days. But I do know that the one time I pulled my credit report, it had a glaring error on it. It said that I defaulted on a student loan that I never defaulted on, and it was causing my credit score to be low. First of all, we can talk about the error in a second. But how does the credit report affect your credit score?
Okay, so that's a great question because a lot of people think that they can work on their credit scores, and you can't. You can't directly work on the credit scores because the way a credit score is generated is the credit score actually operates on the data. It actually takes all of the credit information in the credit report. It reduces each of those items that we call trade line into a numeric value, and then it calculates that calculates that score based on those numeric values. So if you want to increase your credit score, what you really need to do is you need to work on the underlying data that's appearing in the credit report. And the reason why your credit scores can fluctuate or vary from report to report is each of those credit reporting agencies has its own batch of data. And the data that gets reported in, even though it may be coming in from the same sources, that data may be coming in at different times. And part of the numeric values that are associated with these trade lines have to do with where you are in your payment cycle. So if you imagine that your credit data is going into one of the credit bureaus on the 1st, one of them on the 15th, and one of them on the 30th, and your payment falls on the 12th, you can see that as that comes in and as that trade line is being reduced to a numeric value, they're measuring you at different times in your cycle. So those trade lines can grossly affect how does that score is calculated.
Right. So we've all heard the FICO score, and each of the credit reporting companies will give you a separate score, correct?
Well, the credit reporting agencies will try and sell you very regularly, will give you or try and sell you what's called a Vantage score. And that's a score that was created by the credit reporting agencies, by a conglomerate of the credit reporting agencies to try and compete with the FICO scores, which is the dominant credit scoring model that's out there. And to say that the FICO scoring models are dominant is probably an understatement. It's like 99% of everybody who buys a credit score to evaluate a consumer is buying some form of a FICO score. And there's several different models they can use, but FICO is the producer.
Right. So I go in to buy a car today, and I say, hey, everybody, I want to buy this car. And so I sit down with a salesperson, and we're discussing it, and they have me fill out a credit application. And they take the credit application. I'm assuming the first thing to do is they're not going to pull my whole credit report. They basically just pull the score, correct?
No, well, depends on where you are and who the dealer is. I have seen some car dealers simply pull a score, but normally they would pull the entire report.
Okay.
Because the credit bureaus want that pulled. And when you are a subscriber and you are making an inquiry for a specific purpose, which is to grant credit, you're going to get the whole report.
But the point is that if you have a high credit score, a good credit score,
yes,
you're likely to be treated better than somebody with a low credit score or a bad credit score. And that's, for instance, will be revealed in like what interest rate they offer you.
Define better.
Well, I'm saying it's a scale. It's a scale, right? So
well, yes, absolutely. But here's what I want to tell you. You know, people think about how they're treated at the car dealers and whether you're a desirable customer to the car dealer. You think, oh, I have great credit. I'm a desirable customer. Not necessarily so, because they're not going to make anywhere near the same amount of money on somebody with an 850 score as they will on somebody with a lower credit score where they have much more profit.
They can sell a subprime loan, for instance, and make more profit off the loan itself.
Absolutely. Right. And the reality was that some years ago, many of the finance companies put caps on the amount of profit that they would allow dealers to take. But recently, those caps are starting to fall away.
Right.
So we're back to the wild open west, where car dealers, if you want to know how much they're going to charge you, the answer is how much you got.
Right. Well, generally speaking, we want our score to be as good as possible, because it'll help us when at some time or another either negotiating a purchase of a car, buying a house, applying for a mortgage, or I understand there's some employers now who look at your credit score for some odd reason.
Well, I don't know if if the employers are looking at credit scores per se, but we'll get back to that in a second. But yes, generally speaking, having a higher credit score is going to be more beneficial for consumers, but not always, not unless you know your credit score. So, the easy for instance is, if you have an 825 credit score, which is stellar, and you walk into a car dealer and the car dealer wants to make a lot of money on you, they're just going to look at you and say, gee, I'm sorry, you've got like a really low credit score. And if you don't know that you have an 825 credit score, you are the person who is there to be fleeced.
Wait,
okay?
you just suggested a car dealer might do something unethical. This is rocking my world. Actually, just keep talking while I gather my breath over here.
So yes, and that happens to my clients very much regularly. The car dealers will in negotiation, they will regularly try and convince you that they're doing you a favor by getting you credit, irrespective of what the credit score. And sometimes they'll lie to you about the score if they think that you don't know it, or you can't see it, or you don't understand it.
Right.
They will try and convince you that credit score is terrible and that you need to be grateful to them for getting you financed at such an incredibly high rate.
But ideally, you want as good a credit score as you can possibly get.
Absolutely.
And you mentioned earlier that there's not necessarily anything you can do to, quote unquote, improve your credit score except to do the things that are common sense, like pay your bills on time and so on. But I guess the problem I mentioned earlier is when I pulled my credit report for the first time and I saw that I defaulted on a student loan I hadn't defaulted on, that one black mark on my credit score, on my credit report, had knocked me down quite a bit, because I know when I fixed it, it changed it. How often do mistakes happen in credit reports?
Well, we don't really have any definitive answers from that, because we're still we're waiting for the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau to gather us all the data. And we may have a much harder time of that with the Trump administration, because they've been cutting back on all of the functions of that agency to try and benefit business. And one of the businesses that they supervise are the credit reporting agencies. But according to one report that I saw, I think it was the 2011 report, it's now already, 7 years old. Yeah. There were 44 million people who had ordered credit reports in that past year. And of them, 8 million had disputed. So
almost 1 in 5.
Almost one in 5. A little bit less than 1 in 5 who had seen their report saw an error on it. So, there are certain kinds of errors that that come up more regularly than others. But the important part of it is that you think about it, there are 3 major credit reports, maybe a 4th, and if you have 3 reports, given, those kinds of odds, chances are pretty good that if you're holding all 3 of your credit reports, one of them is going to have an error in them, and you got to know what to do with it.
Right. And one of the things I learned from talking to you is that you think, well, it's always going to be clerical errors, but how often does that happen? Well, it happens quite a lot, for instance, that information shows up on the wrong report because of similarly spelled names or very, very similar social security numbers. Information winds up in the wrong place. I mean, errors can happen very, very easily, but then also don't these credit reporting agencies share the information back and forth so that, in other words, a mistake on one report can become a mistake on several reports?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so you've just thrown in a whole bunch of stuff, but the problem that you've identified is something that we call a mixed credit file. And the reason that this happens goes back to that idea about how many people are contributing to these databases. Mm-hmm. So you think there are 40,000 odd, and rising every year, 40,000 odd subscribers that are contributing into these databases, right? And you think about people with incredibly common names like Smith, Jones, Williams, and depending on where you are, there may be ethnic populations that have names that are particular, like Lees and Kims in the Korean population.
Or names that are hard to spell and get misspelled easily.
Exactly. And so, the job of the credit reporting agencies is to make sure that out of those 40,000 people who are contributing, or 40,000 businesses that are contributing, that they sort these into 250 million neat piles corresponding to the consumers in the database. And they mix this up from time to time. That's what we call a mixed credit file. And yes, they happen because somebody screws up a keystroke. And the real reason that this occurs is that when the credit bureaus are looking at evaluating all this data that's flooding into them, they have to generate several different points of correlation in order to be able to identify a consumer and make sure that all the credit that belongs to them winds up on their report. So if you think about how many David Smiths are there across the country, there's gobs of them. There's a huge number of them, but they don't all share the same address. They don't all share the same zip code. They don't all share the same date of birth and social security number. So when the credit reporting agencies are looking at trying to sort this information, they're looking at multiple points of correlation across the data that's coming in and using that to sort. So one of the most common errors that you see for those mix-ups is between like a Dave Sr. and a Dave Jr. because they share an address. They will share a former address. They share a name.
I've seen social security numbers that are really close to like 1 or 2 digits off.
Exactly, and sometimes you see twins who have very similar names have that exact problem. And so it's a very common problem that we see on the credit reports, and it's a very damaging one because now going back to your other point, which is that this data cross pollutes.
Right. So let's get down to the practical aspect of this. So if there's a mistake on my credit report, how do I find that out and what do I do about it?
Well, if you are like most people, the way that you're going to find out most likely about the mistake is you're going to be sitting across a finance manager or a mortgage broker at a closing table, and they're like, oh my gosh, look at this on your report. You're going to find out because you've been denied credit. That's the cue that most people get. We recommend to all of our clients that they pull the reports from each of the major credit bureaus at least once a year.
And you're given one free shot per year, right?
You get one free credit report every year from every
agency.
Every agency. And if you are a person who is out there shopping for a job, looking for a job, there are specialty reporting bureaus that are going to be out there that are collecting data specifically for employment purposes and generating employment scores based on that data. So if you're looking for a job, you want to go look at that report, that set of reports beforehand. If you're looking to open a checking account, there are checking account credit reports, and you want to take a look at those.
But I'm sitting at home right now watching this video, and my goal is I'm gonna, as soon as the video ends, and watch it all the way through the credits to where I say hello to Milo and Wolfie. I'm going to then switch to another screen or go someplace else because I can order the credit reports online, correct?
Absolutely.
Should I do that?
Well, it depends on what you mean by online. So let me send them to the good place first. Okay. If you want to order your credit reports, you can go to my website, which is www.consumerlawyers.com, and on the resource page, I have free letters that will get you your free major credit reports.
Okay.
In addition, we have also on that page a free resource that will allow people to order up their background check reports that can be used by employers to look at their background before employment.
Okay.
And by the end of the week, by the time that this thing gets up on the web, this podcast, I will also have one up on my page that will be for checking account specialty agencies, and those are all free, and they can just fill them in, mail them off. They come with envelopes ready to go. Just fill in your name and drop them in the mail.
And I know from talking to you previously that you can order your stuff online, but it's a bad thing to do because a lot of times to get your free credit report, they'll ask you to click a dialog box where you're basically saying, in exchange for this, I promise not to sue you for mistakes in my report.
Yeah.
What a scam.
Well, that's only the start of the problems that you have with that. But that has been historically one of the problems, is that many of the credit reporting agencies have built what they call arbitration clauses into these shrink wrap agreements that you click through. Most people do not read these before they click through them, and so they don't know what they're agreeing to, and so they will be waiving that. But there's another problem with ordering online through the bureaus if you think you're doing that. And this is a little challenge that I'm going to issue to the viewers if they want to test what I'm saying. Many of the credit reporting agencies will offer people the opportunity to order online, and they'll put a little button below it, say, click here for your report and score. And when you click the button, what happens is the credit reporting agencies will direct you off of their website to a related company's website that is not a credit reporting agency. So for instance, TransUnion at the time of this is redirecting people to a website called TransUnion Interactive, which is a sister company that is not a consumer reporting agency regulated by the Fair Credit Reporting Act.
Okay.
And so we have seen consumers trying to dispute based on the reports that they get, even though the data may be the same or very similar.
Right.
Courts have been rejecting challenges by consumers to the information that they see on those based on the fact that it's not being generated by TransUnion, even though TransUnion is sending you there.
Right.
And even though it's owned by the same company as TransUnion.
Okay, so you're better off mailing in the request
Absolutely.
for your credit report, and they'll mail you the credit report back?
That's right. And
Okay.
it's supposed to come within 30 days.
Okay, and once you get the credit report, you go through it and you look, and you're going to go, oh my gosh, I forgot I had a Sears card. And people are going to go, Sears? What's Sears?
Montgomery Wards?
Yeah, exactly. J.C. Penney. And you go, oh, and you know, it's like your permanent record. There's going to be stuff on there. It's like, oh my gosh, that still exists. But as you go through it, you're going through, and you find that one line item says you defaulted on this loan or something that's not true. And you realize that kind of thing not correct is going to screw up your credit score.
Absolutely.
Then how do you go about disputing that?
Okay, so disputing that is not difficult, and again, free resources on my resource page at www.consumerlawyers.com. All you have to do to dispute it is write a letter to the same credit bureau that's got the data. Now, there are some rules that I would have people follow when they are making these disputes. Number one, be succinct, get right to the point.
Right.
Include any relevant documents that you have that prove your point. Don't go on too long. That you don't need every detail to prove that you are right, but you do need to get to the point, and you do need to be clear. And if at all possible, make sure that you include a copy of the page from the credit report with the item circled or starred or highlighted so that you can identify it back to the credit reporting agency and show them where the problem is exactly as it appears.
Isn't the onus on them, in essence, to prove that the line item is good as opposed to you disproving that it's bad?
Under the statute, the way the statute's set up, it is presumptively, if you dispute it, it's going to be presumptively incorrect, and they're going to have to verify it in order to pull it, to keep it on the report. They have to verify it. If it's not verifiable, it has to come off the report. Okay.
And so, like in the one example I gave you, where I had a defaulted student loan, which was not defaulted, I sent the dispute letter, and very, very quickly, I got the letter back saying, oh, you're right, we've removed it. I mean, and I can't imagine they did the work on that. Or, I mean, do they actually go do the work, or do they sometimes just take it off because they don't feel like doing the work?
No, they're not going to take it off just because they don't feel like doing the work.
Okay, I got lucky.
There are two ways that this item can come off the report, generally speaking. So the job of the agencies at the time that they get that letter is, the first thing is that they have to kick a copy of that letter or the dispute, a summary of that dispute, off to the person who reported that data. So if it's a bank, that it's a banking item or a student loan item, they have to send it to the student loan agency that's got that, that's reported that up about you, and they get a chance to review their records and see if that item is being accurately reported.
Okay.
And then they will kick back an answer, and then the bureau gets to look at, okay, here's your dispute, and here's the response from the creditor who says that you owe the money. They have to weigh and balance that and figure out whether or not it's verifiable at that point.
Okay.
And again, if it's not verifiable, then it has to come back off the report.
So let's take this to the worst case scenario. You've pulled your credit report after you got denied credit. You found some glaring error on it. You send the dispute letter, and they come back and they go, we verified it's you. And it ain't you. What do you do then?
Well, then unfortunately, you're in the position of doing one of two things. The first thing that you can do, which is the thing that I recommend that people do, is take a good hard look at that response letter. The letters that you're going to get back from the credit reporting agencies are going to have information in them about what they have done and what they have found and what they have looked at. Mm-hmm. So when they see that, and when you see that information, if there is some error in their process, you want to make sure that you are responding to that appropriately.
Okay.
So if there's information in there that they misinterpreted or that they got wrong from your dispute letter, you want to correct them and you want to respond to that. If you have more documents or more information that can help them drill down on this and come around to your point of view, give that information to them.
I'm saying we've tried all this. None of it worked. There is something on the credit report, and they're going, Steve Lehto, you went to Mexico in 1968 and stayed at a hotel and ran up a $15,000 bar tab you never paid. And that we're not removing it. I'm going, dude, I was 6 years old. I didn't go to Mexico when I was 6 years old. They refused to remove it, and I can prove it wasn't me. What happens then?
Then you are left with the option of suing.
Okay,
that's really where you're at.
It took us this far to get to the point where you go, okay, hire Ian.
There you go, hire me.
Okay.
Yeah, hire me, exactly. Or hire somebody like me if you're not in Michigan.
Right.
But the most important part is that the Fair Credit Reporting Act does provide a remedy for people if the credit reporting agencies and the people who provided the data about you have failed to take your investigation request seriously, your dispute seriously.
Okay. So the key is everyone should pull the report to take a look at it.
Yep.
Everyone should be aware of what their credit score is, generally speaking, get an idea for it. Yep. There's a bunch of places you can get that now. I think 3 of my credit cards give me credit scores.
Yeah, they'll absolutely give you those for free.
Yeah.
But the important part is really looking at that data, because the data is the thing that creates the credit score.
Right.
So it's just measuring that data.
Yeah. So pull. You get a free report once a year. You may as well pull them all.
Yep.
Pull the reports. Look at them. Look for mistakes. If you find mistakes, dispute them, and go through the process. And it's kind of a pain. I mean, it's work. You think, why am I doing this? Well, it's also how our society works. It's just part of the bargain of getting credit and so on.
It's part of the bargain of having credit available to us as a society, yes. But there's one other thing that you've got to look for when you're in those reports is you absolutely have to look at what's called the identifying information.
Okay.
Which means your name, your former addresses, your current address,
right.
And your date of birth and social security number. Mistakes happen in these identifications all the time, and they can lead to that very problem that we talked about at the outset, which is having a mixed credit file. They can also be a sign that somebody may have stolen your identity and may be in the process of trying to steal your identity by creating a mail drop.
Right.
Okay, that's your first sign. If you see identification information or an address that's not yours, never been yours, not associated with you or anybody you know, write that in as part of your dispute saying, hey, you have the wrong address for me. I have never lived at this place.
Okay.
And what that's going to do is make sure that there's not a possibility that that a pre-screened offer of credit comes to that address.
Right.
So if that address, which doesn't belong to you,
right.
is coming in from a credit source on a regular basis, it can be causing that address to flip and rotate in your credit file so that every time one of your creditors puts in an address, it changes, and then it changes to the next address that comes in.
Right.
You don't want that happening. You want your current address to be listed as your current address. You want all your old addresses listed as old addresses, and any stray addresses, you want to make sure that they are not anywhere near your credit file.
Right, and the mistakes that can get into one file become like a virus and spread to the other files. And
absolutely, because what happens is that creditors and debt collectors can pull down that report, and when they see those addresses, they can add those in.
We have a winner.
Winner, chicken dinner. There you go. Success. Means your time's up now, Steve.
Pretty much, yeah.
Exactly. But anyways, they can pull that address down, and they will incorporate that into their own database and report that back up to not only the bureau that they got the information from, but they can report it to other credit reporting agencies that didn't have that data.
Right.
So now you have a cross-pollution of these data pools that becomes like, a cancer that just spreads across your entire credit file from one creditor to the next, from one credit bureau to the next.
Cool. Well, Ian, we are out of time. Although that was not my alarm. That was your alarm.
That was my alarm telling us we're out of time.
Yeah. So thank you very much, sir, for that. I will put the comment, put the links down below the video about where they can find your website and all the free information. You're like me; you give away free stuff on the internet. I gave away last chance letters for years, and so that's everything you need to know about credit reports and so on. Questions or comments, as always, shoot them my way, lehtoslaw.com, LEHTOSLAW.com. I'm also on Twitter, iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Podbean, Google Play, and YouTube. Thanks for watching and listening. Bye-bye.
Thanks.